long-awaited latest season of Doctor Who is finally here with a brand new cast and fresh stories. So now that it's over and my opinions on all of the episodes have had some time to settle, was it any good? My name is Ellie Blackwood and I'm a fantasy writer in progress who's loved Doctor Who since I was a little kid. And today we're going to explore where the new season of Doctor Who went wrong and where it went very right. These are all my personal opinions, and I totally expect that not every viewer will see things the way I do, which is why I'm really excited to see what discussions might happen in the comments section, so whether you agree with my takes or not, leave a comment, let's discuss. And if you want more videos analysing Doctor Who in your life, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. This season was intended as a bit of a jumping on point for new viewers, so if you're new to Doctor Who, here's a quick recap. Doctor Who is the world's longest running science fiction show, which began in 1963, went on hiatus in 1989 and then revived in 2005 and is still running today. It's about an alien Time Lord known as the Doctor who regenerates into a new body when fatally injured. They travel around time and space in a high-tech spaceship called the TARDIS, which looks like a police telephone box from the outside. Most of the time, the Doctor travels with one or more human companions who help the Doctor explore the universe, fight aliens, and generally have a grand old time. It's somehow simultaneously one of the silliest and most devastating shows you will ever watch. The Doctor's numbering has gotten kind of messed up lately, it's a long story, but the current incarnation, whose first season just aired, is known as the 15th Doctor, played by Ncuti Gatwa. Because of the changing actors and the wide variety of stories that can take place in this universe, Doctor Who is something of an episodic show, where you don't have to watch everything from the beginning to understand what's going on in a given season. The series I'm discussing in this video is Series 14 since the 2005 revival, but because it's something of a soft reboot, some outlets list it as Season 1. Confused? Don't worry, that's par for the course with Doctor Who, just roll with it. Now that we're up to speed, the first part of this video will be my thoughts on the latest series as a whole with no spoilers. So if you haven't seen the season just yet, don't worry because I won't ruin any of the surprises. While the current showrunner is Russell T Davies, who also ran the show from 2005 to 2010, the show managed to feel like it was keeping itself fresh. I loved Gatwa from his first appearance in the 60th anniversary special The Giggle, and he continued to shine in his first proper episode, The Church on Ruby Road. But for me, he really became the Doctor in episode 3, Boom, and I didn't feel like I got a proper deep dive into his character until episode 6, Rogue. In fact, one of my biggest criticisms of this season is that we didn't see more of Gatwa. The season was filmed while Gatwa was finishing up his time as Eric on Sex Education, and it was also around the time the Barbie movie came out, so presumably he had promotional obligations for that. As such, it's not really a surprise that the Doctor Who shooting schedule had to accommodate his other obligations. But there are 2 episodes in a row where Gatwa is not present in the flesh for most of the runtime. With only 8 episodes in the season, or 9 if you count the Christmas special, it feels like the Doctor is just gone for a significant chunk of the season. The episodes themselves are also only around 45 minutes each, which is normal for modern Doctor Who, but previous seasons with that episode runtime have had more like 12 or 13 installments. It's worth noting that Series 13 of the show from 2021 has only 6 episodes, largely to do with production issues thanks to filming during COVID. But the runtime hovers around an hour for each episode, and that season was one big overarching story rather than trying to build out too much of a self-contained story in every episode. I certainly have my criticisms of Series 13, but at least I didn't feel like the episodes simply didn't have the runtime to tell the story to its full potential. I just think it could have used the runtime it did have more effectively. By contrast, I found the episodes in Series 14 consistently quite enjoyable, but it left me feeling like the majority of stories weren't completely finished. I felt like I was missing a few scenes of the Doctor and his companion Ruby Sunday, as played by Millie Gibson, having fun in the TARDIS together. And in a couple of the episodes, I felt like the characters had to make some leaps of logic to keep the story moving forward in the right direction, rather than giving them more time to investigate and come to their conclusions more naturally. Now, that might seem odd given that modern Doctor Who has shown itself to be very capable of delivering good, satisfying 45-minute episodes. Even if the season's episode count was reduced, that shouldn't change the show's ability to tell a good story in 45 minutes, right? Well, I think there are a few ways in which the reduced episode count makes it harder for the individual stories to shine. First of all, previous seasons of the modern show that had 45-minute runtimes tended to have at least 2 or 3 two-part stories in each season. This meant that the meteor stories could be given the space to breathe and flex their muscles. Don't get me wrong, there are some two-part episodes that I feel didn't need all that runtime. The Rebel Flesh and the Almost People from Series 6 come to mind. But for the most part, I think previous eras got away with telling more complex stories by essentially giving them an hour and a half to work with. By contrast, every episode in Series 14, aside from the finale, is a single part. Just off the top of my head, I believe The Devil's Cord and Rogue in particular would have made good two-parters. Another advantage of having a higher episode count is that there's less pressure to make every episode address the overarching season mystery. Even just using a couple of extra minutes to point out that, oh, something weird is going on, isn't that funny, is runtime that might in some cases be better spent fleshing out the character's logic or explaining an important concept. A higher episode count also gives you more room for character development without the pressure of shoving character work for the Doctor and the companion and any important side characters into every single episode. But ultimately, I think several episodes in this season just needed a bit more trimming. Maybe the showrunners thought the episodes needed a faster pace to speak to the TikTok generation, or maybe they just had so many ideas and were eager to include them all within the reduced episode count. I don't really know. But with at least a couple of the stories in this season, I reckon they could be told at a more sedate, enjoyable pace if a couple of distracting side plots or characters had been cut. Boom, I do love you, but I'm looking at you. It's also just a fact that if your season is only 8 episodes, there's way less room for having a flop or two in there. I think nearly every season of Doctor Who has a couple of episodes that are kind of stinky, but when you have 12 or 13 episodes, people still come away feeling like they watched a great overall season. When you only have 8 episodes, if 2 of them end up being stinkers, that's a quarter of the season down the drain, rather than only a sixth or less. It's still the same number of stinky episodes, but people notice them much more. Ultimately, I think the season could have been improved by doing one of 3 things: trimming the plots down, increasing the number of episodes, or giving the existing episodes more runtime to allow their plots more room to breathe. Each of these options would solve problems in slightly different ways, but they would result in something better than what we got. Personally, my preference would be to keep the length at 45 minutes and increase the episode count to 12 or 13. But it doesn't look like that's happening for next season, so I hope the showrunners take one of the other 2 options into account. I do have some more thoughts on the episodes themselves, specifically about why I don't think they meshed into a cohesive whole in a way I would have liked. But I'll save that for the spoiler section. And speaking of spoilers, this is the first of the spoilery sections, so if you haven't seen this season of Doctor Who and you don't want spoilers, save this video to watch later and come back when you've seen the season. For the rest of us, let's get into it. As I mentioned in the spoiler-free section, I generally wanted to see more of the Doctor and his character in this season, which is kind of a shame because the character work we do get from the Doctor was really fantastic. To properly understand the 15th Doctor, we have to look at some of the things that happened to his immediate predecessors. In Series 12, the 13th Doctor found out that she isn't actually a normal Time Lord, but a child fallen through from another universe who was picked up by a Gallifreyan explorer. When the explorer found out that the child had the ability to regenerate, they experimented on the child and created a way to splice regeneration into the Gallifreyan's genes. And that's how the Time Lords were born. The Doctor's memory of all this was wiped, and 13 only managed to find out a few more details about who she used to be. But ultimately, that leaves the Doctor with no knowledge of who they really are, no knowledge of their biological parents or real home, and a big chunk of their memories missing. 13 did actually retrieve a pocket watch with her missing memories, but she dropped it deep inside the TARDIS, choosing to focus on who she is now rather than who she used to be. But even though the Doctor has made peace with the missing memories and still very much identifies as a Gallifreyan Time Lord, 15 still grapples with the fact that he doesn't know his true origin. With the 15th Doctor, we also saw the return of a character trait that we hadn't really seen since Matt Smith's 11th Doctor, an emphasis on him being the last of the Time Lords. So between the classic series of the show and the revival, the Doctor's home planet of Gallifrey was destroyed in a colossal time war that threatened all of time and space, and it was the Doctor who pulled the trigger on Gallifrey's destruction. So a big part of the 9th, 10th and 11th Doctor's characters revolved around them grappling with their grief and guilt. But in the 50th anniversary special, The Day of the Doctor, all the incarnations of the Doctor up to that point banded together to undo their mistake and save Gallifrey. For a few seasons, Gallifrey was safe, albeit frozen in a pocket universe. But when the Doctor's arch-nemesis, the Master, discovered that the Doctor was the origin of the Time Lord regeneration ability and the most powerful Time Lords conspired to cover it up, he destroyed Gallifrey in a rage. So, like some of his predecessors, a big part of the 15th Doctor's character is dealing with the loneliness and trauma of his people and his home planet being destroyed. But this time, he doesn't have that sense of guilt over being the one to destroy Gallifrey, he's just really damn sad. He's always cognizant of the fact that he's the last of his species yet again, and this fact causes him to empathize with and save the bogeyman in the episode Space Babies. We also can't talk about the 15th Doctor's character without discussing what happened to his predecessor, the 14th Doctor. The 14th Doctor only lasted for 3 specials to celebrate the show's 60th anniversary, and was played by David Tennant, who also played the 10th Doctor. The mystery of why this face returned was a big question throughout these specials, and the answer arrived in the 3rd special, The Giggle, which is also when the 14th Doctor was shot by the evil Toymaker and began regenerating into his next incarnation. But instead of regenerating like normal, 14 bi-generated, splitting into both himself and Gatwa's 15th Doctor. 15 was instantly more energetic and vibrant than 14, and he and Donna Noble confronted 14 with the truth. 14 had simply pushed himself too far and worn himself out, and his old face coming back was a sign that he was burnt out and needed to rest for a bit. So 14 went to go live with Donna and her family, and 15 flew away in the TARDIS. As 15 says, they're doing rehab out of order. With 14 now in his past, it seems pretty obvious that 15 has moved past his burnout. He has energy in spades after all, and seems always excited to move to the next adventure. But he's falling back into his old coping mechanisms, using adventure as a way to cover up his loneliness. The 11th Doctor in particular was a big fan of running away on adventures as a way of hiding all his guilt and trauma over the Time War. And as I mentioned before, while 15 doesn't carry that level of guilt anymore, he still absolutely carries loneliness and deep pain. 15's unhealthy coping mechanisms are exemplified in the episode Rogue, where 15 strikes up a budding romance with a futuristic bounty hunter. When Rogue fakes a proposal to the Doctor to cause a dramatic distraction, 15 reacts by running away in a way that feels genuine rather than for an act. And I believe 15 reacted this way because of his existing trauma around his romantic partners such as Rose Tyler and River Song being heartbreakingly ripped away from him. And indeed, at the end of the episode, Rogue defeats the villains at the cost of being trapped in a barren dimension with no way back. If I had a nickel for every time the Doctor fell for someone whose name began with R and they ended up being trapped in another dimension, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice, right? Actually, it's 3 if we count River's computer world as another dimension. Anyway, I digress. 15's initial response to his grief over Rogue is to insist on moving forward to their next adventure, but his companion Ruby Sunday encourages him to take a moment to breathe. In general, Ruby is a positive influence on the Doctor, with the Doctor seeing his struggles around not knowing his birth parents reflected in her, and at the end of the season he credits her with making him more comfortable talking about his family. But the Doctor knows that ultimately Ruby's place is with her family, not forever travelling in the TARDIS with him. So when she leaves at the end of the season to spend time connecting with her recently discovered parents and she tells him she loves him, he doesn't reply. And I think it's not that he doesn't love her back, but that it would be too painful for him to say it back when they can't be together anymore. The 14th Doctor did get a lot better about verbally showing affection to his loved ones, but even with that development, 15 still bottles up his emotions, specifically when he has to separate from someone he cares about, whether that's a potential romantic partner like Rogue or a good friend like Ruby. Another hang-up that 15 inherited from his predecessors is his insecurity around his own morality. On the surface, 15 is a highly moral person, motivated by saving people above all else. In fact, when he comes across the futuristic community of Findtime, which is being menaced by slug monsters, he tries to save them even though they're white supremacists who refuse his help out because of their racism. This is deeply upsetting to the Doctor, not just because they're disgustingly racist to him, but also because he defines himself by being able to save people, and in this instance they're such hateful people that they simply won't let him. The Doctor has had non-white incarnations before, but they were all during the period before the Time Lords wiped the Doctor's memories. So the Doctor simply doesn't remember having experienced any racism before, and that makes him all the more incredulous about how genuinely awful the people of Fiftime are. On a more wholesome note, we especially see 15's compassion on display when he interacts with the space babies, empathizing with Captain Poppy and reassuring her that she's perfect just the way she is. But even though the Doctor is mostly highly empathetic and motivated by saving people, he has a selfish, sinister side to him. In the episode Rogue, the Doctor vows to defeat the evil Chulder by sending them to a barren dimension, which he thinks is more humane than killing them. But when he thinks the Chulder have killed Ruby, he reveals that his plan isn't as humane as he previously seemed to think, asking Rogue how long the Chulder live so he can delight in how long they will suffer for. It's not that the Chulder didn't deserve punishment, but 15's behaviour here reminds me a lot of how the 10th Doctor punished the family of Blood in Series 3. While 10 didn't kill the family, he devised a harsh punishment for them that seemed aimed at making them suffer as well as making sure they couldn't hurt anyone else. 15 obviously wants to stop the Chulder from causing more damage, but he also wants to get revenge for what they did to Ruby. Another moment where the Doctor grapples with his grey morality is when he defeats Sutekh, the god of death who returns at the end of the season. In order to make sure Sutekh doesn't escape and kill the entire universe, the Doctor realizes he has to kill Sutekh. As someone who prides himself on being a pacifist, this is deeply distressing to the Doctor, and he even admits that in this small way, by making him take a life, Sutekh has won. The Doctor does sometimes have a desire to hurt his enemies out of spite, and when he gives into that impulse even out of necessity, he has to face the cognitive dissonance that he isn't as merciful as he thinks he is. Another contradiction in the Doctor's behaviour is how he rails against the foolishness of faith in the episode Boom, but at the end of the episode he admits that he needs faith even if he doesn't like it. That to me sums up the Doctor, a giant tangle of compassion and rage and selfishness all held together by his faith that maybe everything will be alright in the end. If the giant ramble wasn't enough of an indication, I am really vibing with the 15th Doctor, and I can't wait to see him again in the next season. But the Doctor is only half of a good TARDIS team, so now let's talk about the other half. The new companion for this series of the show was 19-year-old Manchester girl in London, Ruby Sunday, as played by Millie Gibson. A big part of Ruby's contribution to the story of the season is the mystery around her birth parents. As a baby, Ruby was left at a church by a mysterious cloaked figure, and even though she loves her foster mum and grandma, she still wonders who her biological parents are. And throughout the season, it starts snowing around Ruby when she's deeply reflecting on her parentage, creating a mystery around her very existence. This is reminiscent of a plotline that we've seen in Doctor Who before. Series 7 of the show, back in 2013, saw the introduction of the companion Clara Oswald, played by Jenna Coleman. The big mystery of Series 7 was why the 11th Doctor kept meeting Clara as different people throughout time and space, and why she always seemed to die saving him. I'll admit that I loved theorizing about the Impossible Girl mystery when the season was coming out, but Clara herself was arguably not the most strongly fleshed out character at the time. She was certainly enjoyable to watch, with Coleman's charisma greatly contributing to her clever, sarcastic characterization. But to me, Clara became a much more interesting character when the Impossible Girl arc was over, and her travels with the 12th Doctor saw a more interesting dive into the twisted codependent relationship between the two of them. That is, I prefer Clara when her primary purpose was as a character and not as a plot device that also flirted with the Doctor sometimes. Can you tell I've been wanting to make a video about a deep dive into Clara Oswald for a while? Leave a comment if you think I should go for it. Suffice to say, while I enjoy series-long mysteries, I feel like Ruby Sunday risked the same problem that Clara in Series 7 had. That is, being more of a plot device than a fleshed-out character. However, Ruby's mystery arc gets turned on its head by how it's resolved. It turns out her parents are totally normal people, and the significance that Ruby attaches to finding out who they are is responsible for all the strange happenings. The explanation explanation for how exactly that works from a mechanical perspective is a bit underdeveloped in my opinion. However, from a thematic perspective, this reveal makes Ruby feel like a reverse Impossible Girl. Ruby isn't special because her parents are special, she's special because we think she's special. It's a bit of meta-commentary that I actually really loved, and it feeds into a theme that Doctor Who has nurtured for a while. One of my favourite quotes in the entire show comes from the 2010 Christmas special, where the 11th Doctor says, "In 900 years of time and space, I've never met anyone who wasn't important before." With this in mind, the reveal about Ruby's parents makes a ton of sense for the show. I do understand why some fans felt let down that Ruby's parents are totally normal after such a big build-up, but I think the commentary that the plot point is making requires a big build-up. Yes, it would have been massive if Ruby's mum had been revealed to be Susan, or Rose Tyler, or the Master, or something like that. But everybody is special, and everybody is important, and random human lady Louise Miller is just as significant as any of the titans of Doctor Who lore. So while it's totally chill if you disagree with me, I personally give this reveal a big thumbs up. Even before the reveal about Ruby's birth parents, something that helped her avoid the issues I had with Clara is that we get a focus on her family and home life. It's never in question that she has a vibrant life outside of the Doctor, and it felt very natural for her to leave the TARDIS to focus on her family at the end of the season. It also helps that there's never any insinuation at romance between the 15th Doctor and Ruby, whereas Clara and the 11th Doctor had tons of romance teasing. I'm not one to say that there can never be a romance between the Doctor and a companion, and I'm considering making a video about Doctor-companion romances and when they do and don't work. But suffice to say, I think they work best when the romance is integrated into the existing character work. I think Ten and Rose did a pretty good job of this, and while it was a bit more debatable about whether their relationship was romantic in nature, 12 and Clara did too. If they aren't developed properly, I find Doctor-companion romances more grating and distracting than anything else. With 15 and Ruby, it was super refreshing to have an uncomplicated platonic friendship that can just let the characters breathe and shine on their own. That said, sometimes their friendship was a little too uncomplicated. One of the great things about companions is that they force the Doctor to think more like a human. When the Doctor gets too detached from a situation, the companion brings them back down to earth and forces them to think with empathy. That's why nearly every single companion has a certain amount of significant conflict with the Doctor at some point in their journey. To bring it back to 12 and Clara for a second, the reason I like their dynamic so much is the tension and conflict caused by their oh-so-similar personalities clashing against each other. If the Impossible Girl arc had concluded and Clara just became the Doctor's bestie and went along with everything he said, she would be a profoundly uninteresting character. I hesitate to say that Ruby is completely uninteresting because I do like her, but I don't think she's living up to her full potential as a companion quite yet. I find it very interesting that when Stephen Moffat, the showrunner for the 11th and 12th Doctor's eras, was asked to guest write Boom, Russell T Davies told him this about Ruby as a companion. "It's the classic companion. She's not a quirky, different one. It's an Amy/Rose one." And Moffat happened to take that information and write the most conflict between the Doctor and Ruby all season. When the Doctor needs to counterbalance his weight on the mine he's accidentally stepped on, Ruby insists on walking right up to him to give him the canister she's found instead of tossing it to him. And he gets really mad at her because he believes she's taking an unnecessary risk. I believe Moffat wrote this because he understands that an integral part of the archetypical Doctor Who companion is the tension between them and the Doctor, and I would tend to agree. However, this season wasn't the end for Ruby Sunday because she has been confirmed to appear in at least a couple of episodes of the next season. And if I had one wish for how she'll be written during her return, I'm hoping for some more clashes with the Doctor. Interestingly, the next companion in the TARDIS is played by Varada Sethu, who appeared in this season as Mundy Flynn in Boom. And given that Mundy and the Doctor clashed quite a bit in that episode, I wonder if that's an indication that Sethu's companion character will also push back on the Doctor a bit more than Ruby did. It remains to be seen how much Mundy and the new companion will have in common, but I would be so down for more conflict. Give me more drama! And speaking of drama, this new era of Doctor Who is introducing a whole new pantheon of villains for the Doctor to fight. We first got wind of this pantheon during the 14th Doctor's run. In the episode Wild Blue Yonder, the 14th Doctor invoked a superstition at the edge of the universe, which is implied to have resulted in some deadly magical beings breaking through into our universe. So while this era of the show still deals with a lot of sci-fi concepts, there are slightly more fantasy elements than before, especially when it comes to the Pantheon. The first confirmed member of the new Pantheon was the Toymaker, who returned to challenge the 14th Doctor to a deadly game. The Toymaker was a villain from Classic Who, in a First Doctor story where most of the episodes are missing and we only have the audio. The new era of the show has brought the character back as a god of games with reality-bending powers. In the 15th Doctor's first season, a few other existing villains were also confirmed to be members of this pantheon of gods. Sutekh, the god of death, who fought the 4th Doctor in the classic serial Pyramids of Mars, returned to fight the Doctor in the season finale as the most powerful member of the pantheon. And in a speech by Sutekh's Harbinger, the existing villain the Trickster was confirmed to be the god of traps, and the classic villain the Mara was confirmed to be the god of beasts. I think restyling old villains like this is a really clever way of treating existing fans while not confusing new fans too much. But in episode 2, The Devil's Cord, we also got an original member of the Pantheon in Maestro, as played by Jinx Monsoon. Honestly, Maestro may be my favourite villain of the season. I think they're fantastically fun, and I really hope the show manages to get Jinx Monsoon back for a rematch with the Doctor. Based on statements made by showrunner Russell T. Davis, we can expect at least a couple more members of the Pantheon to show up in later seasons. And personally, I think one of these upcoming Pantheon members might be Ruby Sunday's mysterious neighbour, Mrs. Flood. Ever since the episode The Church on Ruby Road, Mrs. Flood has occasionally popped up to say weird and ominous things, and she very pointedly recognises what a TARDIS is. Based on the way she takes over narrating the story at the end of the series finale, and based on the way she keeps breaking the fourth wall, my theory is that she's the god of stories. I think it's a bit early to tell how well the Pantheon idea is working, but on the surface, I do quite like it. It creates an extra class of villains who can manipulate reality and utilise more fantastical powers than your average Doctor Who villain. And given that Maestro and Sutekh used human harbingers to announce their arrivals, and that Sutekh dropped Angels of Death in a bunch of places who just looked like regular human women, it's kind of intriguing that anyone the Doctor meets could be an agent of the Pantheon now. Suffice to say, I'm interested to see what will come next for them. I mentioned in the spoiler-free section that while the episodes as a whole are very enjoyable, they didn't mesh together as cohesively as I would have liked. And I suspect this was a consequence of moving some of the episodes around pretty late in production. Episode 2, The Devil's Cord, has a weird time skip where a line indicates that Ruby and the Doctor have been travelling together for about 6 months since Ruby's first trip in the TARDIS in Space Babies. This makes me think that it was originally supposed to come later in the season. My suspicions were further fueled by episode 3, Boom, which is Ruby's first time on another planet. You're telling me that the Doctor and Ruby traveled together for 6 months and never went to another planet? The production's reasons for changing the episode order may remain a mystery. It's possible that something happened behind the scenes that made it impossible for them to be ordered any other way. At one point, I had a somewhat cynical theory that the weird episode order was thanks to the producers deciding last minute that they wanted Rogue to air in between parts 1 and 2 of Bridgerton Season 3 to capitalise on the Regency era hype, but I don't know if that would have been possible with the show's production timeline, and I also think that the episode coming out at any time within a couple of months of Bridgerton's release would have capitalised on the hype regardless. In any event, Rogue strikes me as the sort of episode that would have done well earlier in the season. It's a pretty continuity-light story that features some great character work from the Doctor that I would have loved to see sooner. I also think it was a mistake for the episodes 73 Yards and Dawson Bubble to air one after the other, given that they're both pretty Doctor-light stories. Breaking them up with an episode featuring more of the Doctor would have helped ease the effects of having to accommodate Gatwa's schedule. There's no absolute perfect order to these episodes, especially because there are components in some of them that were intended to come at specific times during the season. But generally, I think a better order would have been The Church on Ruby Road, Space Babies, Rogue, Boom, Dot and Bubble, The Devil's Cord, 73 Yards, and then the 2-part finale of The Legend of Ruby Sunday and Empire of Death. Some episodes obviously stay where they are, but this order satisfies my conditions of moving Rogue earlier, moving The Devil's Cord later, and splitting up those Doctor Light episodes. 73 Yards also gave me serious vibes of Turn Left from Series 4, so it feels right to me coming directly before a finale, especially because it sets up the Roger Ap Gwilliam plot point that becomes important in the finale. My one nitpick is that I don't love the idea of putting Boom and Dot and Bubble, which are both set in the future, one after the other. Doctor Who normally tries to break up the historicals and future episodes so that you get a more even variety of stories throughout the season, but Boom and Dot and Bubble have pretty different feels to them, so I think it would still be okay. The episode order was a big factor in making the season feel disjointed to me, but there's another big elephant in the room in that regard. Doctor Who is no stranger to getting a bit meta. The most obvious example is probably when the 12th Doctor gave a monologue about the bootstrap paradox directly into the camera in the cold open of the episode before the Flood. He also played the Doctor Who theme and Clara's theme on his guitar at various points. But the 15th Doctor's era gets a whole new level of meta, and I'm not quite sure how to feel about it yet. I mentioned in the villains section that Mrs. Flood breaks the fourth wall a fair amount, which makes sense if she's the god of stories. Maestro also breaks the fourth wall a couple of times, and I can buy that as a reflection of their powers of performance. But there are a few places where the Doctor and Ruby break the fourth wall or otherwise do something meta, and it's weirdly inconsistent. The first example of this is in the Christmas special The Church on Ruby Road, where the Doctor and Ruby burst into a musical number when they face down the goblins. Whenever there's been diegetic musical numbers in Doctor Who before, it's typically been in the context of a character giving a performance that they could have reasonably practiced for ahead of time. But with this, the Doctor and Ruby break into song coming up with lyrics on the fly, and even though Ruby is musically inclined as a hobby, it still feels quite meta. However, the Doctor and Ruby's most fourth wall breaking episode by far is episode 2, The Devil's Chord. First of all, Ruby plays her own character theme on the piano, though within the context of the show, it's a song she wrote for her friend, so fair enough. But then there's a moment where Maestro's music comes to grab Ruby, and the Doctor makes a comment that he thought the music was non-diegetic, which implies that he can usually hear the non-diegetic music in general and therefore is aware that he's in a TV show. And at the end of the episode, he tells Ruby there's always a twist at the end before winking into the camera and breaking into a heavily choreographed musical number. Finally, the episode ends with him and Ruby dancing across the Abbey Road crossing, with each of the stripes playing notes like piano keys as they step on them. This is just a huge level of fourth wall breaking, and there's never an explanation for it by the end of the season. Doctor Who is a very goofy show, so my issue with all of this isn't that it's goofy, but that it's inconsistent. After The Devil's Chord, most of the other episodes in the season feel pretty much like a return to form for Doctor Who, leaning more heavily on sci-fi elements or general unexplained phenomena rather than over-the-top fantasy with musical numbers. Even the finale, which saw the Doctor battling Sutekh, the god of death, still felt pretty typical of Doctor Who, even if the villain's powers were a bit otherworldly. To me, stuffing most of the fourth wall breaks and meta elements into one episode feels a bit jarring, and it contributed to my feeling that the season overall is tonally inconsistent. But here's the thing, I actually really freaking love this season all the same. It's not the best season of the show by any means, and I've just spent however many minutes hashing out all my problems with it. But despite it all, I had a really great time. It's hard not to get swept up in a sense of infectious joy while watching these episodes, not least because Gatwa and Gibson are compulsively watchable. I enjoyed a good amount of the writing this season, don't get me wrong, but even a lot of the parts that fell flat for me were still fun thanks to the cast. And I'm really going to miss watching it each week until it returns next year. Thank you so much for sticking with me throughout this recap, and please give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Comment your thoughts on the latest season below, and please also let me know which Doctor Who videos you'd like me to make next. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss them. Also be sure to subscribe to my monthly newsletter so that you don't miss any of my upcoming content or projects that I'm working on. The link to that is in the description. See you next time.